In this lesson, we're continuing our discussion of mutual assent. Specifically, we want to talk about the difference between the acceptance and the counteroffer under both the common law and Article 2 of the Uniform Commercial Code. But before we jump into that, it's just a quick refresher. How do we go about forming a traditional enforceable contract? Remember, we have three elements. We need mutual assent between the parties, consideration, and no defenses to formation that would invalidate the otherwise valid contract. And in case you're wondering where we are in this lesson in the big picture flow of our contract analysis, we're still right here under formation on the M in my cats do sneak. Of course, this M stands for mutual assent. And what is mutual assent? Remember, in order to form a traditional enforceable contract, we say that there needs to be a meeting of the minds between the parties. And how do we make this determination on a contract law fact pattern? Well, we have to determine whether we have a valid offer and a valid acceptance of that offer. Once we say we have an offer and acceptance, we say we have mutual assent between the parties. And at this point, we've talked about how an offer is formed, how an offer can be terminated, and ultimately how an offer is accepted. And we've even talked about the exact moment in time that an acceptance becomes valid, which of course was the subject of our last video when we discussed the mailbox rule. But in this lesson, we want to move on, continuing our discussion of acceptance, and really talk about a unique situation that arises when the offeree receives an offer, adds different or additional terms to the offer, and sends it back as a purported acceptance. So this is the situation that we have drawn up here on the board. And this is also a situation you're going to hear referred to in contract law as the battle of the forms. And here's why, okay? So how this typically is going to play out is we're going to have an offeror who drafts a long offer sheet. Imagine that we have a 20-page offer sheet that's full of terms and conditions and clauses and provisions. And it doesn't matter for right now. Don't worry about what the offer is for. It could be services, real estate, goods, right? Doesn't matter right now. Just a long offer sheet though, right? And that gets sent over to the offeree. And the offeree takes this 20-page offer sheet, looks it over, reads all the terms, conditions, clauses, provisions, likes everything they see, says, you know what, I want to accept this offer, this looks great, signs their name at the bottom, and right below their name, just as a note to put back to the offeror, they write something like, ship by next Tuesday, or if it's a service contract, let's get started on this project next Tuesday, exclamation point. But they mean that to be a acceptance, right? And they send it back as a purported acceptance. The question is going to be, even though these forms, right, even though this 20-page offer sheet and this purported acceptance are identical in almost every way, right, the offeree has added this tiny little additional term at the bottom, right? He's saying ship by next Tuesday, or let's get started on this project next Tuesday. And the question is going to be, when the offeree did that, when the offeree added that tiny little additional term on the bottom in tiny print, did that actually rise to the level where now this is not actually an acceptance, it's a counteroffer? Right? And that's what we need to explore in today's lesson. In this situation where we have the battle of the forms, right? And another example that we can see this happen would be boilerplate forms, right? Imagine that an offeror and a offeree who typically are in the same industry and deal with a lot of purchase and sale of some kind of widget, and there's lots of industry standards and trade practices, so they have boilerplate order forms and boilerplate acceptance forms, right? And the boilerplate offer or order form gets sent over, and the boilerplate acceptance form that gets sent back has some slight differences in it, right? They're not a perfect mirror of each other. Well, what happens then? Again, is it an acceptance or a counteroffer? And that's what we're dealing with, right? And that's usually the situation where we have boilerplate forms, where we're talking about this idea of the battle of the forms, right? But anytime, right, the ultimate issue spotting here is anytime that the offeree sends back a purported acceptance that has different or additional terms on it. However we got there, right, the question is it an acceptance or a counteroffer? Of course, the effect of an acceptance is going to be, if we have offer and acceptance, we have mutual assent between the parties. Our first element of the traditional enforceable contract is satisfied. Obviously, we know a counteroffer terminates the original offer and simultaneously forms a new offer. So the effect of this decision is huge, right? In terms of coming to a conclusion in our contract formation analysis, this changes everything. So it's a very important analysis. And to get started, right, we're going to find that step number 1, the common law in Article 2 of the Uniform Commercial Code treat this situation very differently, right? Let's say, though, to start, let's just talk about the common law. Let's say that this situation deals with a real estate contract or some sort of contract that involves services. So we know we're in the common law universe, and this contract is going to be governed by the common law and only the common law, right? Well, what do we do? How do we handle this situation where the offeror has drafted a 20-page offer sheet, the offeree has received that offer sheet, added a tiny term on the bottom, right? Ship, or let's get started on this project next Tuesday, exclamation point, signed it and sent it back. How do we determine whether it's an acceptance or a counteroffer? Well, the common law, right, if we're dealing with a service or real estate contract, makes this analysis very easy. The common law applies the mirror image rule. And the mirror image rule simply says that in order for this purported acceptance to be a valid acceptance, the terms in the offer must match the terms in the purported acceptance exactly. In other words, the terms of the offer must mirror the terms of the acceptance exactly. We need a mirror image between the offer and the acceptance in order to have a valid acceptance, right? And if we don't, if there's any changes, no matter how small, how subtle, how slight, right, it's a counteroffer. That's the mirror image rule, which is what the common law is going to apply to this situation. So under our fact pattern, right, if we have a 20-page offer sheet sent over to the offeree gets it, loves the contract, signs it, and then writes, let's get started on this project next Tuesday, exclamation point, and sends it back. Under the common law, is that an acceptance or a counteroffer? Well, if we apply the mirror image rule, even though 20 pages of that contract are a perfect mirror image, because the offeree has added this tiny little additional term on the bottom, that is going to no longer make the offer and acceptance a perfect mirror image. We have an additional term. Therefore, under the common law, that is a counteroffer, even though the change is very small. It's just a tiny little additional term on the bottom. The offer, the terms of the offer no longer perfectly match the terms of the acceptance. So under the application of the mirror image rule, under the common law, this situation is a counteroffer, not an acceptance. So the good news about the mirror image rule is if you're on a contract law fact pattern, you're dealing with a contract for services or real estate, and you see this fact pattern start to come up where the offeree is adding different or additional terms and sending it back, your analysis is very easy. It should take you less than a minute or two, right? Very bang bang. All you have to do, look at the offer, look at the acceptance. If they don't mirror each other perfectly, you know it's a counteroffer. So that's usually a very quick application, right? So on a contract law fact pattern, the common law mirror image rule has the benefit of being a very easy, straightforward analysis. Now you can imagine though, in real life, right, not just on a contract law fact pattern, in real life, the application of the common law mirror image rule, although it might be simple, can lead to some very harsh results, right? I mean, just imagine the situation we just drew up, right? We have an offer and a purported acceptance that are exactly the same in every respect except for this tiny little note that the offeree added on the bottom. Clearly, both parties intended this to be an enforceable contract. And this additional term at the bottom of the page doesn't probably materially alter the deal in any way, right? And the party's true intent was probably to have an enforceable contract. So it's a pretty harsh rule, right? The mirror image rule saying, sorry, even though you guys intended to have a contract, and even though the offer and acceptance are mirror image in every respect except for this tiny little term, doesn't matter. Under the application of the mirror image rule, that's a counteroffer. So actually, sorry guys, you never had a traditional enforceable contract, right? So you can see under the application of the common law how we can get to very harsh results, especially in these form contracts, right, where we have boilerplate forms. You can imagine in the UCC universe shifting over where we have two merchants who regularly deal in the good at issue, right? And they're just dealing in some type of widget. There's probably industry standard forms, right? And so this party has this one industry standard boilerplate form, and this party happens to have a different boilerplate form. Well, even if they mean to enter into a contract, if they have different forms, right, they're not going to be a perfect mirror image. Again, even if they intend to have a contract, under the common law mirror image rule, they're going to not have a contract. They're going to have a counteroffer because they don't have a mirror image. So what happens as the common law evolves and the drafters of the UCC come along, they see this issue in the common law and want to address it. So they land on 2-207 to deal with this exact situation, this battle of the forms, where we have an offer sheet being sent over, offeree is making some small change, some different or additional term is being added and sent back. The UCC comes along and says, well, in some cases, right, we don't need a perfect mirror image. We're going to find that we have an acceptance, even if there's different or additional terms. And 2207 is the mechanism in which we apply this, right? How do we come to this, right? So if the requirements of 2207 are satisfied, what it's basically saying, again, is we can have different or additional terms, that's fine, and still come to a valid acceptance, right? So this is a pushback on the common law mirror image rule. And so how does it work out? So if you look at the statute, right, 2-207, it's broken up into three subparts. You have 22071, 22072, and 22073. 22071, just to first we can overview each of the subparts quickly, go over big picture, and then we'll jump into each one and talk about how it all works out, right? So 22071 though, big picture, deals with our fundamental question, right? 22071 addresses whether, in this situation where the offeree is sending back a purported acceptance with different or additional terms, is that purported acceptance actually a valid acceptance or is it a counteroffer? That's what 22071 is addressing, our baseline question, okay? After 22071, 22072 deals with the issue of, okay, if we find under 22071 that we do in fact have an acceptance, we have an offer and we have an acceptance, there is a problem now, right? Because we have an offer that has one set of terms and we have an acceptance that has a different or additional set of terms in it, right? So what terms control, right? What is the terms of the contract? So 22072 is going to tell us whether the terms that were added by the offeree, do these new terms become part of the contract, or are we going to have to remove these terms that were added and implement UCC gap fillers? Now, UCC gap fillers, we've talked about in previous videos a little bit. We've touched on them, right? If you remember back to our video on offer formation. We said under the UCC, in order to form a valid offer, the offeror did not even need to specify a price term, right? Remember, we said under the common law, in order for the offeror to form a valid offer, they had to specify the price term. But we said under the UCC, no price term was required. An offeror could actually form a valid offer without specifying a price term. And that's because the UCC is much more willing to plug the gaps in the contracts, right, than the common law. The UCC is a much more flexible set of rules when it comes to contract law than common law rules, right? So what happens with the UCC is if a contract is missing something, right? If it's missing some sort of term, like a price term or something else that doesn't make sense, in a lot of situations, the UCC is able to come in with gap fillers. So for instance, if a UCC contract for purchase or sale of goods is somehow missing a price term, which would seem like a really big term to be missing. There's a big hole in this contract. No problem. The UCC is not going to invalidate the contract because it's missing a price term. It'll plug in a UCC gap filler and plug the hole, right? And come up with a fair price term for the parties. That's what the purpose of gap fillers are. And it's critical to understand that when we get to 22072, right? Because 22072 is the situation where we can actually have some holes in the contract and we might need to implement gap fillers, right? Because remember, if we're finding under 22071 that this purported acceptance that has different or additional terms in it is actually an acceptance, well, now we have an offer and acceptance with different terms. So what terms control? And again, the question is going to be whether the offeree's new terms that they added to the contract, do those become part of the contract, or do we remove those and plug in UCC gap fillers to fill the hole, right? That's going to be our question under UCC 22072. UCC 22073 deals with a separate issue entirely, right? So the majority interpretation of 22073, right? And there's split jurisdictions on some of these interpretations, but we're going to talk about the majority for 22073, right? The majority interpretation here is, okay, if 22072 deals with the situation where we find that we have an offer and an acceptance, 22073 deals with the situation where we find we have an offer and a counteroffer. We go the other way. So the parties never had a traditional enforceable contract. But what happens if the parties don't realize this? They don't know the rules of UCC 2207. They just have offer sheets going back and forth. They think there's a contract and they perform like there is one. What do we do if we get to court and the parties have never actually had a traditional enforceable contract, but they performed like they did have one? Well, in that situation, in that rare situation, 22073 comes along and says, here's what we're going to do. If the parties never had a contract, but performed like they did have one, we're going to look at the original offer and the purported acceptance that was really a counteroffer, right? And we're going to say, what are the overlapping terms? We're going to take those terms that overlap, right, that are not conflicting with each other, and we're going to put those into a new document. And then if there's any holes in that new document, we're going to plug in our UCC gap fillers. That's going to give us a complete contract. We're going to impose this contract we've Frankenstein together on the parties in court to enforce, right? Even though they never had a contract to begin with, because we found that this was a counteroffer. Because they performed like they did have one, we're going to impose this Frankenstein contract we're creating by taking the terms that overlap, putting that into a new document, and then plugging the holes with gap fillers. We're going to take that contract and impose it on the parties in court. Now, important to recognize, 22073 is rarely tested on contract law fact patterns. Typically, when you're seeing a battle of the forms fact pattern and UCC 2207 tested, it's testing 22071 and 22072. Important to recognize that 22073 is kind of its own separate issue, right? But worth noting, right? That's the main idea. But jumping back into our main core principles here, 22071 and 22072. So if we go back to our original example, just to talk about 22071, let's stick with the typical offer and acceptance. So let's say we have an offeror who is forming a 20-page offer sheet for the sale of 1,000 dry erase markers, and this is for $10,000, right? And then let's say that this is some sort of office supply store. So they prepare this offer sheet for 10,000 or for 1,000 dry erase markers for $10,000, and they send this offer sheet, right? It's a big, thick document, 20 pages, full of provisions and clauses and this and that, and they send that over to a university, right, that's interested in purchasing the dry erase markers. That university rep looks over the contract or the offer sheet and says, this looks great. I like all of these provisions, all of these clauses, looks great. I'm gonna sign my name at the bottom and send it back. But before sending it back, the offeree writes below her signature, let's ship this by next Tuesday, exclamation point, right? How about we ship this by next Tuesday? Or just, let's keep it simple, ship by next Tuesday, exclamation point. Writes that on the last page below her name and sends it back, right, to the offeror, the office supply store. Our question, so we know we're dealing with a purchase or sale of goods, so we're in the UCC universe, we're applying 2207. Our question is, under UCC 2207, is this purported acceptance that the offeree is sending back actually a valid acceptance, or is it really a counteroffer? Okay, well 22071 tells us how to make this determination, right? 22071 states that a definite and seasonable expression of acceptance or written confirmation, which is sent within a reasonable amount of time, operates as an acceptance even though it states terms additional to or different from those offered or agreed upon, unless acceptance is expressly made conditional upon assent to the different or additional terms, right? So that's what UCC 2201 is going to tell us, right? 2207-1, that's the language, right? And that's a big, long mouthful. And an easy way, though, of saying, to put that in simpler terms, right? Basically, what it's saying is that beginning part of the statute, to break this down line by line, right? It starts by saying a definite and seasonable expression of acceptance or written confirmation, which is sent within a reasonable amount of time, right? That's basically just restating basic principles of contract law. A definite and seasonable expression of acceptance or written confirmation, right? That's basically just the idea that when this is sent back, it's got to be an objective manifestation of willingness to enter into the agreement. It can't be some type of invitation to deal, something indefinite or unseasonable, right? And it has to be sent within a reasonable amount of time. Well, we know that anyways, right? When we talked about termination of the offer, one of the ways an offer can be terminated is by a reasonable amount of time passing. So that would be true for any offer acceptance analysis. So the first half of that statute, right? UCC 2207-1, a definite and seasonable expression of acceptance or written confirmation which is sent within a reasonable amount of time, is basically just redundancy, right? It's restating a bunch of stuff we already know. Yeah, sure, the acceptance has to be an objective willingness to enter into the agreement and needs to be sent within a reasonable amount of time. We know that stuff. And by the way, most of the time you see 2207 tested, it's going to be a written confirmation being sent back, right? If you have a battle of the forms, it's usually in the form of a battle of the forms, right? Where we have a written confirmation being sent back. So the first part, all of that to say 2207-1, that first part is really just restatement of basic contract principles we already understand and know. So no problem there, right? So it says all that stuff, a definite and seasonable expression of acceptance or written confirmation, which is sent within a reasonable amount of time, right? Which we know operates as an acceptance, even though it states terms additional or different to those offered or agreed upon. So that kind of third element in the UCC 2207-1 text in that statute is really just saying, okay, so as long as it's definite, seasonable, or written confirmation and it's sent within a reasonable amount of time, it meets the basic contract law principles. Even if it has different or additional terms, that's fine, right? We're going to say that's an acceptance, right? And then it lays out the most important part of the statute, where it lays out the main exception, right? So it's like, basically, even if you have different or additional terms, if it's a definite and seasonable expression of acceptance or written confirmation, and you're sending it within a reasonable amount of time, that's fine, right? Even if you have different or additional terms, unless, right, and this is the key, unless the acceptance is expressly made conditional upon the offeror's assent to the different or additional terms, right? So that's the key. When we're trying to determine whether we have an acceptance or a counteroffer under 22071, the key determination is going to be when the offeree added these different or additional terms. Did the offeree say that I accept your offer on the condition that you, offeror, assent to these different or additional terms being added? If the offeree expressly did that, it's a counteroffer. Now, if the offeree just added something like ship by next Tuesday and didn't make it an express condition that the offeror had to assent to, then it's an acceptance, right? And the easy way to see this, if you want an example that strips away everything, is imagine that I offer to sell you this dry erase marker for $5. And you say, I accept on the condition that you lower the price to $4. Well, that exchange right there, is your statement an acceptance or is it a counteroffer, right? And now, probably anyone in the general public, even if you've never been to law school, everyone knows that's a counteroffer. You're saying, I accept on the condition that you lower the price to $4. So what have you as the offeree done, right? You've added a different term, right? You've changed the price from $5 to $4. And you're making it an express condition that me, the offeror, must assent to, right? So because you're saying I accept on the condition that you lower the price to $4, that's what makes it a counteroffer. Now compare that to if I offer to sell you this dry erase marker for $5 and you say something like, well, it'd be cool, Michael, if you lowered the price to $4, but I accept your offer as is, right? If you said something like that, well, you've added a different term, right? You've changed the language of the offer. You've added something to that, but you haven't made it an express condition that I must assent to. That, therefore, it's an acceptance, right? So you can probably easily see the difference between those two statements, right? If you say something like, thank you so much for watching this video preview of our Legal Education Accelerator Program, or LEAP for short. If you would like to see the conclusion of this video and gain full access to our entire 1L and 2L video library, integrated outlines, streamable audio versions, additional practice exams with explanations, and much more, we invite you to head over to our website and join the thousands of law students who have already enrolled. To get started with your no-risk free trial today, simply click the link in the description box below or visit www.studicata.com/leap.
Hi everyone, my name is Serena and I'm currently a law student at South Texas College of Law, Houston.
Hi everybody, my name is Shiva and I'm currently a law student at Southwestern.
Hi everyone, my name is Michelle and I am a first year student at South Texas College of Law, Houston. I used the Studicata study video series last semester to help me prepare mostly for contracts, and I actually made an A+ in contracts last semester, which I greatly dedicate to the Studicata videos.
By using Studicata to help me prepare for my final exam, I was able to score the highest grade out of my class on the final and even have my essay distributed as the model answer. Not to mention I had done quite poorly on the midterm and was struggling throughout the whole course of the semester, understanding the material and keeping up with lectures.
Because of the Studicata video lectures, I was able to go into my exams with a feeling of confidence. I didn't have to worry about what the rules of law were or how I was going to organize my answer to an essay question.
I would absolutely recommend the Studicata series and their online course materials to anyone. I think that they are not like professor lectures that you might find online or other outside study materials that you may encounter. I think that the Studicata videos really focus on not only ensuring that you understand the material that you're going to encounter on your final, but they also help you to understand kind of the best method for test taking, and they really break down how to approach each problem and the best ways to tackle certain methods on testing, and I think that's really important, and I think it's really special. I don't see that anywhere else in any of the other online resources that I've found. So I would certainly recommend Studicata to anyone who is studying in law school right now. Good luck on your studying, and you're going to do great.
I would definitely recommend Studicata to anybody watching this video. Give it a chance. I'm positive that you will love it, that you will get a lot out of it, and that you will be happy that you gave it a chance. I definitely am. I know I will be using Studicata in the future.
And I cannot thank Studicata enough for getting me through my first semester of law school. I will definitely continue to watch the Studicata video lectures throughout my law school career, and I highly recommend that any future or current law student do the same.